Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the class of today. As usual, we have quite a tight plan. Let's simply start by you showing me that you are able to hear me properly by giving an agree sign. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. What we are going to deal with today, we are having still an open issue from last week, which has been a quiz that is going to be run by the presenter of last week, Mareike. And afterwards, directly, we are going to continue with the presentation on the world system, the second of the development theories with which we are going to work, and by which we are going to develop the existing critics. So I will directly hand over to Mareike to continue.
Hi. I hope you can hear me. First, maybe regarding the presentation. I sent a presentation with the whiteboards to you, but then we agreed that, or you said that it might be better to include the quiz as well, and then I would send you the entire updated thing, including the whiteboards and the quiz with the respective answers, probably today or latest tomorrow. Yes. Yeah, just as a little reminder from, or to go back to last week's session, I have prepared a little quiz, and now you should be able to see one question, which is which war had an impact on the ideology of modernization theorists. So this is just for you to get back into, okay, what did we do last session, which I think is also helpful to understand today's session. So if you could just briefly choose one of the answers, that would be great. And then I will publish the results later. The question is, should we go maybe and do the quiz first, and then we can go over all the answers. So I've prepared, I will just give you all the questions, and I would ask you to, there are 6 questions overall, to quickly choose one answer for each. Yeah, thank you for answering the question. So maybe let me quickly publish the results. You can remove the yellow, the green, agree sign now. You should be able to now see the results of the questions. I'm now publishing the distribution of the answers. So maybe let's start with question 1. I think it was quite obvious that most of you chose the Cold War, which is the correct answer, because it's the theory from the late 1950s and 60s. For the second question, it's a bit more dispersed, the answers, and maybe it's also okay. Of course, it's also how I formulated the questions. This might also be challenging for you to understand it. Which of the following statements on modernization theory is correct? There are not actually many theories. That was one critical point I want to focus on. There are different approaches to the theory, but it's actually one theory. So you might look on it with a sociological perspective or an economic perspective, but there's actually just one theory. Regarding the last one, the theory originated in Europe. So this is actually not correct, because it originated in the United States. So the last answer is correct. The third question was fairly easy again, and it is also correct here that Wallenstein, was the one who is not actually from a representative of modernization theory. Question number 4 again has many different options, and you chose also various options. Which of the following is not a critique of modernization theory? So maybe some of you did not read the not. So ethnocentricity is actually a critique because it focuses largely on Western states of Europe and the US. Then colonialism also is not considered a factor. So this is also part of the critique, so it might be difficult if there's a not in the question. And trade is not encouraged. It's also, it's not a critique. So I think the second option is actually the one which is not a critique. So the one where 50% of you chose it, it's the right one. The question number 5, it's a bit of a wordplay here because actually the right one is technological development. It's called technological maturity phase. The traditional society is actually the first phase, so that one exists. High mass consumption is the last one. It also exists, and the takeoff is the third one, I think. So that one also exists. So here is just a little wordplay. And the last question asks, which of the following statements is not correct regarding the World Values Survey? Oh, so this is a bit mean because we didn't get the chance to really talk about this anymore. So we can actually not count this one really. So maybe I'm just not going to include it later when when I publish the results, because we did not actually get the chance to properly talk about this. Okay, that's it from my side. If you have any questions, because some of the answers were not clear to you, please let me know. And if not, I would let Götz take over.
Thank you very much. With these regards, I hand over to Lisa.
All right. Can you all hear me? Is this working? All right. Perfect. Seems to work. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for coming. Yeah? Yes, but I can't see it anymore. Okay. All right. No, thanks. Thank you. Sorry, Julia. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. And thank you very much, Götz, for the input, which is, I think, crucial to understand world system theory. So, well, this analytical framework has also somehow derived from modernization theory, although probably rather from the dissatisfaction with it or as a reaction to it. At any point of the presentation or during this class, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand immediately, and then we'll try to figure it out. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do today, I'm going to talk a bit about the background, how Wallerstein, who developed this theory, what kind of influenced, what kind of theories or approaches influenced him. We'll talk a bit about, well, about the key aspects of world system theory and its application in various disciplines. And you will be in charge of elaborating the strengths and weaknesses in group work. And afterwards, after I will comment shortly on what Wallerstein saw as what is kind of where are we heading to, what is happening with our system, what's happening afterwards. Afterwards, we'll engage in a discussion. I hope we'll have time for that, talking about today's relevance of the theory. if we can apply it anymore or not. What do you think of that? Okay, let's get started. So the world system theory was developed by Immanuel Wallerstein, who you can see in the bottom right corner. He was influenced to a large extent by the Annales school in France, especially by Braudel, who worked on the longue durée approach. Longue durée, I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Well, it's about promoting analysis of very long time periods, not looking, for instance, at specific coincidences, such as if we want to understand the Second World War, we wouldn't look at 1939 to 1945, but in the 300 or 150 years at least before or even afterwards. Yeah. So what they also very much promoted was that history should become somehow a theory promoting itself, and not only serve as giving examples for sociology or other social sciences. Additionally, Wallerstein was very much influenced by the dependency school, but we will have that as the topic of next week, so I'm not going to comment a lot on that. Just maybe like keep world system theory in mind when we're going to talk about dependency next week. And we will, and well, the concrete triggers for Wallerstein to develop a new analytical framework were firstly East Asia's economic growth in the 70s, whilst, for example, Latin America or Africa, that had been equally colonized, did somehow not. And secondly, the crisis, or the socialist states were somehow in an economic crisis, although one had believed beforehand that delinking from the Western world would promote economic development for, let's say, kind of the global South or those countries that were not as industrialized as the Western world. So that somehow didn't prove right. And thirdly, especially in the 1970s, people sensed a crisis of capitalism, mainly due to, for example, the oil embargo, Vietnam War, the Watergate crisis, etc. And due to all these crises, also Wallerstein believes that we are in a kind of in a transition, that the capitalist system will sooner or later collapse. But we'll get to that a bit later on. The key aspect of world system theory was, well, I think especially with regards to modernization theory, which we had just been revising, thanks to Mareike, that he states that progress is not necessarily good nor unidirectional. So he doesn't give progress or the development of a country or of its economic development not any value, and he very much underlines that progress can be, or there's not even such a thing as linear progress. There's room for upward and downward mobility. Importantly, he now sees analysis as historical social science, so he wants to take on a historical perspective and combine it with other common methods of social science. The unit of the unit of analysis is now not anymore the nation state, as we had seen, for example, in modernization theory, but actually the historical system. Now, what does that mean? It is, as we have just now heard from Götz, that the system is something a more holistic approach. It's broader in time and also in space. So what Wallerstein then identifies during the whole time or history of human living on this planet, he identifies three different types of historical systems. In the pre-agriculture area, what you can see in the left bottom corner, is what he calls the mini-systems. They were highly homogeneous, small, also rather short in speaking of time spans, more or less like consisting of 6 generations. And then between 8000 BC until 1500 AD, he identifies the world empires, which are marked by a wide range of cultural patterns, but consisted usually of one vast political structure, such as the Roman Empire. And then, after 1500, he identifies capitalist world economies, which are now marked by the same or by a common production structure, but consisting of very different political structures. And starting in Europe, the system expands then all over the world, absorbing other mini-systems and world empires that may have existed in other parts of the world. So after this expansion, he says that since the late 19th century, for the first time, we live in a system, or rather, we live in there's only one historical system in the world. There's no variety anymore. A significant innovation of world system theory is the concept of a tri-model system. If you remember modernization theory, and also this is what we're going to learn on dependency theory, usually those are bi-model, which means it's the global north but the global north on the one hand and the global south on the other hand. Tradition versus modernity. And now what Wallerstein develops or promotes is that we have three different types or three spheres in the world, namely the core countries, which is what we would call the Western world, or let's say the core states have the highest political, economic, and military power. And on the other hand, we also have the periphery, which is, we could almost say, the opposite of it, that have least power, least military strength, etc. But now, importantly, he says that we have also a semi-periphery that has features of both core states and states of the periphery. And I think what is also quite important is that he said, as there are different ways of mobility, he makes distinctions between the mechanisms of developing. So it makes a difference if you're in the semi-periphery and you move on to the periphery, you develop into a state in the periphery, compared to countries that are in the periphery and want to achieve core status. I will not go into too much detail in here, because I think it's neatly written down in the text that we had to read for this week. Maybe just to mention it, that these strategies very much, or like when is the time to develop, very much depends on the core states' economic politics, I would call it. So it depends on what Wallerstein says, that it depends on the core states if they are expanding or if they're rather in a phase of protectionism, whether these mechanisms can actually succeed. Okay, so maybe now just to have a quick overview. I tried to compare quite bluntly modernization versus world system theory. What is different? What is new? Please, if you have any objections, raise them now. I'll just go through it really quickly. The unit of analysis, as I said, is now the world system, the world as a whole, whereas modernization theory usually concentrated on nation states or societies within these nation states of the third world. Methodology is, whereas modernization theory looked at the transformation of third world nation states and their societies, they still wanted to, I think, achieve some general patterns and trace universal trends and prospects, what world system theory does as well, but on a much larger scale. So it looks also not only on geographically speaking, but also historically speaking. Thanks, Götz, for the remark. When we look at the theoretical structure, what I've just been trying to explain before, whereas we had before bimodal structures of traditional versus modern societies, Wallerstein proposes a tri-modal structure. The direction of development, whereas Wallerstein promotes or states that there's possible upward and downward mobility, it's not always unidirectional. In modernization theory, that was quite clearly stated that it's going up unilaterally, in a unilateral way. And the research focus, as I understood it, was in modernization theory vastly on third world nation states, whereas world system theory wants to look at all three spheres, also independently, but also their dynamics and relationships, but also on the world system in general. Is that clear so far? Or has anybody got a question or remark? Mareike, our modernization theory expert, would you agree? Okay, I'll just take it as a yes. All right. So the question is, where or how has modern world system theory has been applied? It has been very often used as a general framework in various disciplines, such as economical science, political science, history, anthropology, etc. And it has been very popular when in the analysis of comparative development or developmental dynamics and relationships between the different spheres within the system. And recently, Van Ham and Pion showed that economic flows, that is, for instance, trade and investment, are still structured depending on to which sphere you adhere. So they could still trace this trimodal structure when they looked at economic flows. On the other hand, Golan and Himmelborn, this now is a very recent study or analysis, they looked at information flows. Now, before, it was very common that information went mainly from the core states down to the semi-periphery, then to the periphery. Not down, but anyway, just to the semi-periphery and then the periphery. But now lately, this has been quite challenged due to social media access internet access, the internet in general. And whereas institutional players you can still find this trimodal structure. For example, independent bloggers or whatever literally challenge this notion of that there's any monopoly on information. How do you call it? Like bringing information out into the world. I put some more examples in the bibliography, so if you have time and you're interested, have a look. So in order to illustrate a bit this trimodal system, have a look at this map. This is based on the authors Stein, Caruana, and Brewer that looked at structural globalization, so not about ideological globalization, but actually how has trade been how has trade a lot more interconnected than it has been before. And they used world system theory and kind of systematized all countries into core, semi-periphery, and periphery. And I think this shows quite well, what are the core countries, the semi-periphery and the periphery, which we would expect, right? Africa, Southeast Asia, etc. Although, then again, I think it's a bit outdated. Many countries have changed. That's why I would like you to have a look at what the World Bank published this year about country income. I think you have a very similar picture. If you look at low income, but if you have the red and orange, if you put them together, you have a periphery. I think that fits pretty well. And if you take yellow and light blue together, you would have the semi-periphery, and dark blue would then probably be the core states. Now, however, I think this global perspective that is concerned with especially economic power and political power may be a bit too general for particular analysis. For instance, as you can see here, if we look at income equality, or rather inequality, measured by the Gini coefficient that looks at income inequality, as I just said, measures income distribution, I had to say, we see a very different pattern. And for instance, India and Argentina have a more equal income distribution than the US, for example. So these the countries that, like in general now, the core, semi-periphery, and periphery is now very differently distributed. So we can't really apply, like the world system theory maybe to all. It depends very much if we only look at income in general, and not very much in other factors. But I didn't want to even go too much into strengths and weaknesses of world system theory. I think we should proceed to group work if you don't have any questions anymore. There was a question, Kevin. So lower Gini coefficient means more equal distribution of income. Exactly. I mean, we can also go back for a second. No problem. Yeah. We can see South Africa, Brazil, as Götz mentioned, are kind of the worst. And then you can see at some point that even countries in Africa have more equal income distribution than the US, for instance, which is quite shocking because that's what you do not really associate that with a country of the periphery. That was my point. All right. Are you ready for group work? I think we will just randomly distribute people into either the strengths of world system theory group or the weakness world system theory group. You'll have 15 minutes to discuss some. Write them please down on, you will have a whiteboard, or actually there's already some bullet points so you can just add your ideas. And yeah, I'll see you back in 15 minutes. I will go through the groups if there's just to check if everything's okay. You can always equally send me or Götz a private message if you have questions or something's not working or whatever. All right. Let me just check. Okay, I hope this works now. Good. Is now everybody back, or what do I have to do to get everybody back?
Everyone is back right now. You had to click on the Arbeitsgruppe beenden.
Okay, perfect. Then we'll talk about the group work. Yeah, I'm searching for it right now. Here it is. Okay. This is very big. Yeah. Okay, now everybody should be able to see it, right? Okay, so could maybe somebody from I think that was like the first group, the strengths group, tell us a bit about what they discussed, please. Anybody? Marcos, Julia, Marius? Mm-hmm. I somehow can't do that. Or do I have to? Ah, okay. Now, yes, I got it.
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Could we also have Julia in the moderator role as well, because she's able to explain the first point? I think it was Julia, I'm not quite sure. Yeah. So she would do the first point and I'll do the other two, because that would help. Perfect.
All right, go ahead. Just enable your microphone and you should be able to speak.
Hello? Oh, okay, I hope everybody can hear me well. So one of the strengths that we include in our presentation is that the world system theory have this semi-periphery concept which make it different from the dependency theory and the modernization theory also. And this semi-periphery concept enables the inclusion of transitioning condition between the core and the periphery that is being conceptualized in dependency theory. And like it's actually also one of the information that is in our reading material, and it points out that the semi-periphery concept, can see the whole, identify the characteristics that are considered as transition that is not being part of the core or the periphery characteristics. I hope what I'm saying is clear enough. Yeah. Marius?
Yeah, I'll continue with the second and third point, which is basically saying that the world system theory does not only focus or does not only consider only one nation, but like all nations as a whole. So it's more like a holistic perspective on the world system, and it also proves or shows that there's some sort of interdependency, so that the nations are all somehow connected. I think you could name globalization as example, so that there's like strong connections between different states, and that's what the theory also proves or shows. And that were basically our ideas. Yeah, if someone else has something to add, go ahead.
Thank you very much so far. Well, thanks to the group for also putting these very good points on the board. I would just go on with or continue with the second group. Who of you wanted to? I will have to get it first, but you can already decide on who's going to present. Okay, who's going to do it? Explain quickly what you've been discussing. All right, Kevin, go ahead, please.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Excellent. Hopefully I can make it through without coughing. I have eine Lungenentzündung, so please excuse me. So some of the weaknesses of world system theory. We thought that development is measured on questionable criteria. I know that Lara said that, but I cannot remember what exactly we had discussed about the questionable criteria. But what that means is, and maybe Anka's going to jump in here, I see she's typing. What that means is that core countries generally stay at the top. They are the leaders measured on income. Thank you. Yeah, that this all basically has to do with economic variables. And so the core countries will likely maintain their position at the top of the hierarchy as core countries, and they'll always be the lead actors in this game or in this puzzle. It also sort of that factors into the third point then, that it's a top-down approach that assumes any quote-unquote development or quote-unquote progress comes from, again, these main actors that have sort of solidified their position at the top of the food chain. And then I guess something that I just saw in the text, and I'm not sure if this is what you were just talking about, Guts, or not, but and again, I'm not sure if this is exactly relevant to what we're talking about, but the zero-sum game assumption about, if one actor suddenly does get a bunch of power, that means that power or that capital has to have come from somewhere else, and that means that somebody has lost out on their position in the system. So if a core country was to somehow fall from grace, that would leave space for another country to potentially go up, or vice versa. If I missed anything, guys, please go ahead and jump in. Otherwise, I think we can hand it back over to Lisa.
Thanks again also to Kevin for presenting your stuff. Now to finish everything off, I would... How do I get rid of it? Ah, okay. All right. Let's go on to the kind of the last few minutes, the last points. As Wallerstein believes that capitalism is in crisis, or at least was in the 1970s, and that the whole capitalist economic system will collapse sooner or later. He believes that the question is then what comes after this transition phase in which we are at the moment. And he envisioned a radical transformation of the world system. I mean, you could call it global socialist revolution, although it has very little to do with Russian communism or whatever. It's very different. He believes that there should be a radical redistribution of resources and power on the whole world. So rather seeing that the surplus that core states are making, that profit margin, which is very high, that should be then redistributed to the peripheries in order to have an equal balance. All right, before we end, I would like to watch the short video, because I mean, obviously now the question is, what relevance does that have today? Is capitalism in crisis? Nowadays we have lots of crises these years, I would say, but isn't capitalism maybe working quite well? And what Guts also touched upon, like the environmental justice aspect. Is capitalism, I don't know, hindering environmental justice, or is it helping it? Yeah, let's have a really short video. It's of a member of parliament from England, and yeah, his argument is quite poorly elaborated, but maybe it will be good to start a quick discussion on today's relevance.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Over the weekend, I went for a long walk in my constituency. I was consciously hoarding the retinal images against what I knew would be a long week here in the European Parliament. I strolled across the broad chalk fields of North Hampshire, and I couldn't help noticing that the environment was cleaner than it's ever been. There are more trees in Britain than at any time since we started chopping them down for the first wave of the Industrial Revolution. There are birds of prey circling overhead. They were a very rare sight in my boyhood. Otters have returned to the river. There are salmon and trout in the Thames. The environment keeps getting cleaner. Now, you wouldn't think that listening to the tone of the debates in this place. We seem to have some hardwired part of our brains that makes us determined to think that we're on the brink of a catastrophe. But the stubborn facts speak for themselves. We, in Western countries, are breathing cleaner air and drinking cleaner water than at any time before. And what's done that? Property, capitalism, trade. It was Marxism that taught that nature was a resource to be exploited, a vision that found brutal realization in the smokestack industries of Eastern Europe. The best thing to have happened to the environment was the fall of the Berlin Wall. Cheer up. Things keep getting better.
Did you all hear it? Because it's a bit quiet. Could you just give me the green sign if you understood it? All right, perfect. So my questions, maybe to start a discussion, is that, well, it was Mr. Hannan we just heard, are maybe the so-called crisis, such as the capitalist crisis or the capitalism in crisis, are exaggerated, and that the capitalist system is actually working quite well? Or isn't Mr. Hannan proving Wallerstein's point concerning environmental quality, that actually the core states have the power to shift environmental problems to other spheres, and thereby actually proving world system theory may be right? Any ideas? Please come forward. And then just raise your hand, and we don't really have much time left, but maybe 2 or 3 thoughts.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So I think he pointed out that developed countries are cleaner than ever since the Industrial Revolution, and I think he's just basically stating that the developed countries were very much able to shift the problems to other countries, and even in the so-called developed countries, there's a lot of environmental problems still going on, and it's not all just getting better. There are better technologies, and it's like these are getting developed and there are measurements taken, but still I would definitely not say that capitalism is doing well on nature, because it's I'm not sure if he said that Marxism was the core of telling that nature is a capital that should be exploited, while capitalists were very much capable of doing that as well. So yeah, I think I highly disagree with what he said.
Thanks. Right, I'll let Kevin first, and then perhaps Götz.
Hello? I agree with Laura completely. I thought that it was, my favorite comment that he said was the best thing to happen to the environment was the fall of the Berlin Wall. That was, to me, NIMBYism at its finest. And also, I mean, a lot of what we've read in these texts completely personified Western European ethnocentrism. As long as it's not happening where I can see it, who cares? So, yeah, no, I completely agree with Laura that it's just shifted it somewhere else. And yeah, he was very arrogant, I guess, in his delivery. So, yeah, that's all I got.
Thanks. All right, I think we're actually running a bit out of time. I think there's no really, maybe just to finish it off, I think there's no real right or wrong in either of the questions. The capitalist system, although we've seen these huge bubble bursts and bubbles just coming up again and then bursting again, and Occupy movements and whatsoever, that told us that that capitalism in crisis, it's still working quite well, and the Western world is still exploiting the structures of core, semi-periphery, and periphery, if you want. So that it might be I think one should look at it critically. You know, if the capitalist system, if we are really in that transition period already, or how long it may take to transition to somewhere else, and what if then actually a radical redistribution of resources is what would follow. But then again, what you also said, I think Mr. Hannan is actually proving, or like contradicting himself, and showing how also environmental issues fit neatly into the world system theory, that we have the power to shift all our problems away to other countries, to the peripheral and semi-peripheral countries. All right, I think that was it from my side. Thank you very much for listening. I will upload the presentation, including strengths and weaknesses, afterwards. Yeah, that was it all from my side. I'm not sure if Götz wants to say anything, but thanks.
Just briefly, thank you very much, Lisa, for the presentation. From my side, only next week is reading week. We are not going to have class, so I see you in 2 weeks. I wish you good reading next week and a good rest of this week. See you on Wednesday, 4 p.m. in 2 weeks. Bye bye.